And we are back. Welcome back, folks. Thursday, December 21st, 2017. Sang King reporting live from the Gung studios, all the kings and queens of the kingdom of God. Good morning. It is 7:16 a.m. and we are here joined with our friend Dan Gray, who wrote for the Washington Times in the past. Started his political journey with Watergate when he was very young. Back then he was a progressive, but over time he after the issue, the movement left him. Dan still fights for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights for equal protection under the law. And since he's now in his late 50s, for our historical heritage, Dan's been involved in NRA ILA for over 25 years, successfully sued SEIU in federal court, works closely to the Right to Work and Right to Life organizations and activists. He's been a columnist for Watchdog and the Washington Times and has spoken passionately on radio, in person, just about every liberty issue there is. Dan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Once again, so good to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you too.
You got a great radio voice, by the way. Did anyone tell you that?
It's the microphone, I tell you.
Hey, you know, there's so many crazy things going on. We were talking about during the break, about gun rights. Is there a feedback loop here? Is it going on? Okay. About gun rights. And we have, of course, the issue. There's a couple issues that are coming on. Just recently, a couple weeks ago, I believe it was a week ago or so, it was the reciprocity law was passed through the House. And of course, that's moving on to the Senate. That's good. That's going to allow if you have a concealed carry permit, you're a law-abiding citizen in one state to be able to carry in all states, because these are supposed to be the United States of America. It's supposed to be one country, where we're able to honor the different permits, like a driving permit. You honor my PA permit if I drive in New York, New Jersey, et cetera. But what the left is doing is they're trying to attach this with this this Nix bill, which essentially allows them, as we were talking to the break, to take away gun rights from people with small misdemeanors. Even an unpaid traffic ticket. I'm sorry, I'm looking at different cameras here. Unpaid traffic ticket, quote, violators can have their gun rights removed. So what is the benefit of having reciprocity if you can get if they're passing another law attached to that, a poison pill, that can strip you of your gun rights and your reciprocity rights, so to speak, with like an unpaid speeding ticket?
Well, it's not really an unpaid ticket, just to be absolutely precise. What it is if you don't pay your fine, or you don't show up for court, maybe it got lost in the mail. If it's not satisfied, there could be a bench warrant out for you. This is actually just an expansion of what already exists in America. Here in Pennsylvania, 12 million citizens. There's over 1 million people, 1 million adults who can't have a gun permit. They're not violent people. They're not career criminals. They're not terrorists. They had some kind of bad experience. Maybe they made a bad decision. Maybe they were stupid. Maybe they were even bad people at one time. And they either pled guilty because they were scared, or they pled guilty because they were guilty, or they got a plea bargain. And the crime might have been minor. There are any number of minor crimes. Drunk driving has nothing to do with whether or not, if you did that, or you got in a bar fight when you're 18, any number of things. If you've had the case adjudicated, if you've done your time or your probation, then you should be clean. You should have all your rights back. The only time you should be deprived of your rights is if you're currently under sentence. You're on probation, you're incarcerated, you're on parole. I get that. But once you've been convicted or pled guilty to a crime that's punishable, not that you got that punishment, but punishable by 1 year and 1 day, you're out. You can't have a permit. What that means is you can't exercise your right to protect yourself and your family. Imagine that you had some small, minor thing 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You've been clean, you've worked your job, you've paid your taxes, you never did anything wrong again. But the law says that you can't take a gun with you when you go out to the mall with your family to go shopping, or go to an event, a New Year's Eve event, a Christmas event, even though there are terrorists and there are criminals and there are crazed bad dogs. Not like
I
you're a
mean, look what happened
Republican.
in Australia. This was it yesterday. Yesterday, I mean, this morning. It was this morning. It was a truck plowing into people again. Another incidence of jihadi terrorism.
Well, see, this is what's going to happen is that they're pushing the automated cars and they're going to say you
Yeah, you're
can't
talking about
drive,
exactly.
or actually you can't even travel if you don't have permission from the state. And any minor
It's North
infraction.
Korea worldwide. Hey.
Well, here's the thing. We're all guilty.
Oh,
Every one of us, whether we realize it or not, and I'm not getting into religious stuff like we're all sinners, which of course we are, but when it comes to the multiple overlapping, over criminalized laws out there that penalize every aspect of your behavior. You have, and I guarantee you, I know you're a law abiding man. I know you're a man of God. You're a decent fellow. Everybody I know who knows you, we haven't met yet in person, but says good things about you. There's not a mark that I could see that's wrong. And I checked you out before I even appeared to be on the program the first time because I like to know who I'm associating with. You're all right. And yet, I guarantee you that sometime in the last 24 hours, you committed some felony or misdemeanor without knowing it,
right.
without even being aware of it. Something that, and the law these days doesn't even require, in a lot of cases, mens rea, which is Latin for a guilty mind. That you had to actually
I
know
saw an
what you're
article that
doing.
said that the normal, law-abiding citizen in America is breaking like 24 laws a day or something like that. Just unbelievable. The laws that they're totally unaware of, and you're apparently making all these crimes. And isn't that the nature of a totalitarian regime? That's a great tactic. If you can criminalize everybody, if you want to get rid of anybody, it's so easy.
Well, it's not just that they can pick particular targets, which they can and they do. And we've seen retaliation of that nature when somebody steps out of line, when they make political waves.
Right.
But
But whole
it's
groups
more than
too.
that. The prison industrial complex in America right now, with all these private prisons that are guaranteed a certain number of filled beds and a certain number of profit off of our tax dollars, and who use prison labor. You're talking about like a communist regime. They use it to make more money. Okay. Um, having having inmates give financial services or operate websites, for God's sakes. I mean, this is not exactly a smart thing, but they do it. They do it and they make money off of it. So they have to have a certain number of people in the system at all times. I know a number of people who just got unlucky. They weren't people who stepped out politically. They were just
Right.
people who got unlucky with the system. They got caught for something very minor that should have been a ticket or nothing. And they got slammed. They got bullied into taking a plea bargain, lied to about what the consequences were. And once they've got you on the hook, they got you forever. Now, good luck, by the way, if besides getting carry permit, good luck getting a good job if you have a
I
record.
mean, philosophically, what does it mean that you lose your human rights? I mean, you lose your natural rights. These are talked about of course, with our founding fathers, that these are natural rights. These are rights that are inalienable, given to us by our Creator. How is it that if you have some misdemeanor with some, traffic ticket violation, that you lose your human rights, the values and natural rights that we have just as being created beings to be able to naturally defend ourselves? It's just any animal has that right. Any chipmunk or whatever, dog or wolf or anything in the natural world has a natural right to defend itself. How is it that you lose that philosophically? How it's just such a crazy thing if you think about it.
Well, I'll tell you, I have to say I agree with people forfeiting, losing their rights in certain circumstances for certain periods of time. If you've committed an actual crime, and to me, an actual crime is a crime where you've committed knowing harm to another or negligent harm to another. You've actually hurt somebody, you've done something, and you've had due process and a fair trial. And they don't have trials anymore. They just bully you into taking a plea bargain. And and during that period of sentence, where you're either incarcerated, on probation, on parole, during that period, certain of your rights should be limited. They may say that you can't leave the country or you can't leave the state. They
Mm,
may say that you can't associate freely with people who are criminals or who are drug users. They may say that you can't have any booze or pot or anything. If you do, you're in violation. Um, I don't have any problem with these things. If there's a convicted murderer who's in jail, I don't want them having a gun. But
Hmm.
once you have served your sentence, assuming it was a minor crime and you have served your sentence, what reason is there to permanently disenfranchise that person? That person can't carry a gun. They can't vote. They cannot vote. And I know there's people on the right who say, well, all these criminals, they're just going to vote Democrat anyway. I have news for you. There's plenty of decent conservatives who made a mistake or who got caught up in the system or who actually did something wrong when they were younger. And maybe they even meant it, but who aren't that way anymore. And they
Well,
don't
what's
vote
so sad
Democrat,
is
but
also,
they can't vote.
yeah, I mean, and connected to that, you have about 257,000 veterans that have lost their ability, their human right to be able to defend themselves. They've committed no wrong, other than the fact that they have, some psychiatrist or some crazy doctor that says this or that about their mental status. There's so much propaganda about veterans coming back home. The New York Times, Time Magazine, Newsweek, all these publications, totally guilty of saying that 40% of our vets have PTSD. That comes from a statement that was made, I think, by the VA that 30 to 40% have some symptoms of PTSD. That eventually got changed to 40% have PTSD when they actually said it's some symptoms. Like anybody can have some symptoms of PTSD.
There's something in the law that's called prior restraint, and that's something that's not permitted under English common law, under American constitutional law, under any legitimate legal system. And that says you can't say that somebody might do something
Right.
pre-crime like that movie. So we have to take away their rights. Now, all those veterans you mentioned, a lot of them are not retirement age. They are still under
Right.
contract with the federal government, with the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, and they can, even the Coast Guard goes into harm's way, by the way, and they can be called into active duty service, handed an M4 fully automatic 223 machine gun, and sent into harm's way on our behalf. And yet at home, because they might do something, their rights are taken away. I mean, it's unconscionable what they're doing with these little tiny incursions. They want something reasonable. I'll tell you what. In 33, we gave them the Gun Control Act, and that was a big mistake. And year by year, in 68, there was another major gun control act, and that was a mistake. And then there was the assault weapons ban. Every time they claim these statistics that are false. If you look at the statistics that the mainstream media uses, America is one of the most violent countries out there. But what you have to do is look at where the violence is and what the violence is. Where the violence is primarily in major cities, and it's primarily gang violence. All right. So it's gangs, organized criminals. I don't have a problem with the Trump administration or a Democratic administration going after MS-13, going after the
Mhm.
mafia, the Italian mafia, the Irish mafia, the Jewish mafia, the Korean mafia. They're
Mhm.
organized criminals of every different stripe, biker gangs that are illegal outlaws instead of just good guys who on motorcycles. If you're breaking the law, if you're selling meth, if you're trafficking in sex slaves, if you're shooting people for money, for kicks, whatever, fine, go after them. But those are in the cities. And the other major predominant form of gun violence is suicide. But there are countries like Japan, for instance, which has almost no legal gun possession at all.
Right.
And yet their suicide rate is actually slightly higher than the United States. Somehow, if somebody wants to do something,
Korea too. They top the list sometimes too at suicide rates.
yeah, yeah,
Korea and Japan are in competition for who can suicide more.
it's a sad thing. It is
Very
a
sad.
sad
Very
thing.
sad.
But I'll tell you now, I'll tell you right now, if I'm ever declared a suicide, then I was murdered by a political enemy because it's not something that's in me at all. I don't care what it is. It's just not within me to do it. I understand and forgive and feel sad for anyone who's ever driven to such a terrible thing. But if I wanted to end my own life, or for that matter, anyone else's, a gun is a very convenient tool. But we found out recently that cars and trucks are efficient tools.
Very exactly. And they're actually pushing for quote sensible laws. And now restricting the use of vans and trucks in the UK. I guess they're talking about, of course, the system where they're basically put AI into it and be able to shut down your car at any time. Remember the smart gun thing they want to do with the guns?
Yeah.
Put smart technology in, and they call it smart, but it's really control technology. And the same with the cars, that they'll be able to shut your car down, be able to monitor, track you wherever you go. That's totally Orwellian. That's completely dystopian. That's completely political Satanist.
Not only that, but all these things assume an agency on the part of the government that is something like God. God knows. God, and I believe this. I'm not, again, I don't want to get too religious, but I believe that God knows everything. He's omniscient. He knows
Yes.
everything that was, will be, is now, could be. We're not God. And it's one thing to say a crime has occurred and we've investigated and we have evidence, we have camera footage, we have witnesses, we have DNA evidence, we have fiber evidence, we have all these, we've motive, and this person gets a fair trial and they go to prison, whatever their sentence is, hopefully it's just. But it's another thing to say that somebody might do something and therefore, because they fit a profile. I mean, look, the left has a problem, and so do I, with the idea of stopping people for driving while black. Okay. I know plenty of black people who are really good Americans who have that experience, who have been stopped in their cars, nice, late model, well repaired cars, doing normal business just because they're black. And it's wrong. And the left has a problem, and so do I, with police officers who don't adhere to their oaths, who don't act in reasonable manners, who murder people. And it's happened. We've seen people shot in the back, shot crawling on the ground, begging. We've seen this,
Right.
and even police officers going to prison for this.
No, there are some sour apples in there.
In
Not
any
all,
profession.
But definitely some.
However, you can't say that just because a police officer did something, just because a Muslim did something, just because somebody who called themselves Christian or whatever it was did something, that all other people are going to be guilty of that and should never have their rights. If a veteran happens to have some difficulty coming back, in World War I, they called it shell shock, and there was no great explosion of crime from veterans. There was crime because of liberal policies and prohibition. At World War II, I mean, there were millions and millions of men serving. Almost every able-bodied man was over there, and they saw some gruesome things in all theaters of war. And they came back, and there wasn't a drastic increase in crime. The crime rate came later with their kids who were raised with progressive values. And I think that it's a lack of responsibility, and to some extent poverty and some other causes that are at the root of why crime occurs. And I have no problem with going after that, but I don't want to target any one individual and say that they may do something, therefore we must take their rights.
This is interesting. I want to go back to that point with the veterans, because the actual statistics from the VA is that only 8% of people who served and who come back have some have PTSD. And they also show that PTSD can be clinically basically healed through a process of therapy. So they're getting better at the medical side is getting better at healing PTSD. And also only 8%, that's 92% of veterans who come back that are able to cope with it, that are actually stronger because because they fought for a good cause. Whether or not they agree with each war or not that they're deployed on, they agree with the cause of trying to fight for the liberty of the American people, which of course is a Christ-like thing. But they've been completely slandered, completely lied about in the propaganda machine of the left, and I guess some other maybe even neocon companies that promote that. It's a complete lie that veterans have 40% PTSD. According to VA, it's only 8%. 92% are completely fully functioning. They're actually less likely to kill people. They said that 100 veterans have murdered, people after they came back from deployment. Well, that's over 14 years, and in 1 year alone, even within a civilian class, these are of course gangbangers or people who are doing crime. There's 250 plus murders in even just in 1 year. This 100-year statistic of the veterans is over 14 years. That puts it less than, what is that, 10 a year. So they have an incredibly low, rate of coming back and becoming murderers. Most of them, 92%, are stronger because they served. And, they're completely discriminated against. We were talking with a vet the other day on the show. They're discriminated against. They can't find work because they've been brainwashed to see the vets as these kind of dangerous, psychologically damaged people, when it's just not the case.
Well, I'll tell you, when it comes to PTSD, I had it. I don't have it now. All right. It's not necessarily debilitating. Some people, it can be. When you talked about medical science finding cures, I'm extremely doubtful. My father was a psychologist. I'm familiar with most of what goes on. Drugging people up or giving them electroshocks is not healing. You know what heals? What heals is being trusted and finding work that's meaningful. What heals is the love of family, and even more so, the unconditional, wordless love of having an animal, a pet. Music. Music heals. Time heals. And we all have relatives who served or have friends who served in past conflicts, Vietnam, Korea, World War II. I mean, this just for this country, not to mention the immigrants who come from violent places. And most of these people are extremely peaceful. They hate violence because they've actually experienced it. They don't glorify it at all. And some people, you hear stories that, my grandpa was in Battle of the Bulge and he never talks about it. Well, maybe it's too difficult to talk about. And yet somehow most of these veterans came back and they managed to work jobs. They managed to raise families. They managed to build a great society, a better society than they had even left. And they deserve the respect that any individual deserves. I don't put veterans on a pedestal, even heroes, even ones who served in wartime in combat, even ones who earned Bronze Stars and Silver Stars. I don't put anybody on a pedestal. I look at their actions and I'll praise them or criticize them for whatever they've done, but they're individuals who fought for their oath to our Constitution. There are many ways to serve, so I don't think that making veterans out to be better is a good thing, but they're no worse. They're certainly no worse than a volunteer firefighter or a police officer or a nurse or a doctor or an engineer or a housewife, anyone doing their best to make things better and not commit harm deserves every protection the government can give us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What gets me is how these vets are sort of demonized. The Vietnam vets were, spit upon when they came back. Less so with the Iraq and Afghanistan. But of course, these are people that are putting their lives on the line, and they're getting demonized many times by their own government. They're being targeted by their own government because the totalitarians in the government know that if they feel, if the veterans and the community that actually knows how to fight and use arms and knows how to organize armies and things like that, and that's the reason, why the founding fathers, had everybody 18 to 45 enlisted in the militia, because they knew they fought against tyranny. That is why a huge reason of the Second Amendment to be there. In the event that a government becomes totalitarian and evil, that it has to be thrown off by the people, and they have to raise up in arms against it. And every totalitarian knows that the people who fought for them and even engaged in warfare are the most dangerous threat to their continued existence.
Well, they're the most dangerous threat for two reasons. Number one, because they fought for the ideal, and number two, because hey, they got some training. Which, by the way, if you're a civilian out there, even if you're over 45 or you're not fit for the military physically, whatever it is, there's no reason why you can't learn basic things that will stand you in good stead if something goes wrong. And we hope nothing ever goes wrong, but
yes,
even have to be a breakdown in society. It could be just a home invasion, which does happen. Unfortunately, it could be any number of crazy things. I would refer your readers and viewers to look at something called the Battle of Athens. We're not
Oh,
talking about
yes, we
Athens,
talked about
Greece.
it. Larry Pratt, when he was on the show, he
Yeah.
shared it with us.
Yeah, not Athens, Greece. This is Athens, Georgia. Tennessee, sorry.
Yeah.
And what happened was some veterans came back from war to find that a corrupt cadre, a small group of families, had basically taken over their town, and they were completely corrupt. They were taking money, they were committing crimes, and there was an election. And the election wasn't going to go the way of the people in power. So they grabbed the ballot boxes and they went to the jail and they locked themselves in, and they were going to count them themselves because, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. I think Stalin.
Right.
So the veterans wouldn't have any of that. They armed themselves and they stormed the courthouse and they took the ballots and they publicly counted them with witnesses, and the bad guys were out. And pretty soon, as soon as there was a new prosecutor in town, bad guys went to jail where they belonged.
What's interesting, you mentioned that you also suffered from PTSD. The point is, I think this was the point that Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman was in his lecture. He was saying, look, you can get PTSD many different ways. It's not only people who go to war that get PTSD. I mean, people who are raped, women who are raped get PTSD. People who have a traumatic childhood experience, are molested when they're young, or whatever it is. You can have PTSD from just any traumatic experience. Does that mean we take away all those people's rights who have traumatic experiences that were, forced upon them? They didn't choose to go through. It's just such a crazy scenario. And the fact that veterans, in particular, are targeted as for the two reasons that you mentioned. Number one, they're fighting. They sign up, enlist, fight for an ideal, and they fight because that's important. Any war has to have some type of moral high ground. Has to fight for some kind of purpose. It can't just be for rape, pillage, and plunder. I mean, that doesn't go too far. But it has to have some moral framework in which just people would feel that this is a just war. So that's it's a spiritual thing, really, that you mentioned in terms of that intent of the ideal in which you're fighting. And of course, they have training, and people who fight for that ideal, whether they're seeing combat or not, or whether or not they just believe in the ideal. I mean, this is a threat. This is a threat to an establishment that wants to strip us of our ideals, hand us a new narrative, hand us a new ideals, which is basically worship of state. And it leads always to North Korea. It always leads to, any form of real, political Satanism, what we call it, because it actually leads to a hell on earth.
Exactly right. I don't profess to know what's coming after. I believe personally that God will judge me based on everything about my life, even things that are secret, even things that nobody knows, maybe that I don't even know. But that's my belief. I can't prove it, and I wouldn't even try to prove it to someone. They can believe what they want. That's their right. I do know that we should be judged here on earth for our actions. If we commit harm to others, it should be a crime, and we should get a fair hearing and a fair trial. Accusations aren't enough. And if we're found guilty and exhaust appeals, then we have to suffer the consequences, the punishment for that crime, which is primarily to keep us away from other people. But just as every single person out there, every religion, every government, every organization, we've seen it from top to bottom, they can be corrupted. Anyone, good people, can be corrupted. It's a sad thing. But at the same token, you can't use the excuse of someone's past to predict their future, because I know of people who have had childhood abuse. I know of people who I myself, well, we're not going to get into it in this program, but that was where mine stemmed from, and I got over it. It took me many years, and it is something that people can get over, and some people can't. But that doesn't mean they can't function and have a valid life. And we don't want to victimize them twice. I've seen people who grew up in abject poverty, grew up in war zones, grew up in Uganda during Amin, grew up in Cambodia during Pol Pot. People who have had the most horrific tragedies, far worse than anything I ever experienced, watching their entire families die. In my family, I met a woman who was my cousin who watched her family die in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Far worse than anything I ever personally experienced. However, all those people, very few of them turn out to be victimizers. Very few of them turn out to be crazy. Many of them have problems, but most of them turn out to be decent, caring individuals who are actually more motivated to do good in the world because of what they've experienced, because they know what it's like. You go to a rape crisis center and you will find people who have been victims. You go to a suicide prevention line, you will find people who have been victims, people who have understood the hurt because it's happened to them. And why would we want to penalize those people and take away their right to protect not only themselves, but their families, their friends, their coworkers, their neighbors, people around them? When I go to the mall and I see a man or a woman, and I figure out they're carrying a weapon. I'm pretty good at judging these things. I worked for a police department years ago, and I can see most of the time if they're carrying a weapon. I just look at their general behavior, and if they're not acting erratic and they're, they don't have like dilated pupils and they're not jittery all over the place, they're just acting normally, I'm actually glad they're there. Because there's going to be a time where maybe my wife and daughter are out at the mall, and maybe I'm not shopping with them at that time. I'm glad there's someone there who can step up and protect other people. And that's our responsibility.
Yes. Absolutely. It's so interesting. You mentioned, I want to get back into so many different topics, but let's take a quick break. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this with more with Mr. Dan Gray. Stay with us.
There was a lot of things I really liked about Diella from the very beginning. I loved her passion, the way she sang to the church, the loyalty she had to her parents, and I really wanted somebody who's loyal to True Father, and I knew if she's loyal to her parents, that's a good sign. And the one memory I really have, it really helped me really decide I really want to get blessed to her, was she said that I'd always be second, and she'd always put God before me. And I knew if she was willing to put God before me, I could fully trust her. And that was something that really moved me to, I knew at that point, I wanted to get blessed to her.
Okay, so at first when we met, we completely put each other in boxes, the famous box. And I don't know, I was praying and praying and praying, and I was just not sure in the beginning. We both weren't, and but we just continued talking, and but for some reason it just didn't seem to work, because we were just too focused on ourselves, I think. So, but I kept praying and praying, and then one day I was very frustrated, and I even talked with my mom, and she told me, you know what, Diella, I can see he really loves God, and if he loves God, he can fully love you. And I think that's what I needed to hear, and from that moment on, everything changed.
Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Carr Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Carr Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Carr Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Carr Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit carr.com today.
We are back. Welcome back, folks. Thursday, December 21st, 2017, our final segment here on the King's Report. We're here, of course, with Mr. Dan Gray, brilliant writer and, of course, activist, NRA lifetime member. Aren't you a lifetime member as well? And, of course, activist, NRA.
Because it actually gives them more money and it's more affordable for me. So and I get the same rights, except I can't wear the jacket with the little pin.
Oh, 35 about the Maccabean revolt, Hanukkah. You're Jewish. Happy Hanukkah to you. But can you explain to us Hanukkah and also the Maccabean revolt, why that was so important in Jewish and I would say world history, and of course, after that, let's talk briefly about even the Judeo-Christian principles that lead us to our common day notions of jurisprudence, innocent to prove guilty, fundamental principle in common law and jurisprudence. Tell us a little bit about the Maccabean revolt.
Well, first I want to say Merry Christmas because it's fine with me.
Thank
and
you.
I understand that
Thank you. You're not a racist white supremacist now if you say Merry Christmas.
Well, doesn't that make me a racist white supremacist? I'm confused now. It's okay to be triggered out there if you happen to be. No, and I know that you and your viewers are more likely to be worshiping on this Christmas for what it's supposed to really be about, which is celebrating the birth of Christ. And I don't have a problem with you celebrating the birth of Christ. You're not worshiping Santa and gifts and trees, Yes. That's what the holiday was supposed to be about. What Hanukkah is about religiously is about a miracle of an oil lamp that was supposed to never go out. It was in the temple. And when the Maccabees took over the temple, when they regained it, they didn't have enough oil, just enough for a day, and it was at least a week's journey to the closest place where they could get the oil that was holy and had been anointed properly or whatever, blessed. And the oil managed to last all those days. So that's the religious miracle. But what I tell people, the miracle to me, the thing that matters more than anything that's just a matter of belief, is the history. The Maccabees, and Maccabee means hammers. Okay, they were brothers, and they were hammers. And my grandfather's name was Hammerman, so I don't know if I'm related to those guys, but
interesting.
but they had a religion. They believed in the one God, and they wanted to worship the way they had worshipped since ancient times. And Alexander the Great took over the entire world, and his generals assumed parts of the succession. And they owned major chunks of land, became kings, and started dynasties. The Hasmonean dynasty owned Israel, or Palestine, call it what you want, but it's Israel. And everything was good until they decided that it wasn't okay to worship the one God. And more than that, you had to go and worship their gods, their Greek gods.
Did they put the statue of Zeus in the temple? They forced the statue of Zeus, the pagan sex philanderer, into the temple.
And that was totally unacceptable to the Maccabees and to the people. So they rose up in arms, a small guerrilla band, against the most powerful military force in the world at that time. You would expect them to be wiped out immediately. But in a few years, with a great deal of suffering, they won. They beat their pants off them, and they restored the religion and the freedom that they believed in that had been taken from
Mm.
them. You know, this
They
is not
fought
an
with a moral
uncommon
high
thing.
ground. They fought with a true justice.
Well, this is a true miracle to me, just as 1776 was a miracle. And again, a small group of people who had their rights taken away from them, who wanted them back, who were willing to take up arms against the most powerful force on the face of the earth, the English Empire at that time. And they won.
Mm.
And it took a lot of time and it took some suffering, but they won. And here we are squandering what they won.
Yeah,
But each
yeah.
generation is responsible for maintaining our own liberties and the liberties of the children and the grandchildren that are to come. And I'm still cautiously optimistic that despite all the forces arrayed against us, we can prevail. We must. We have no choice.
Well, let me ask you real quick, because you brought up Israel, about President's sort of redesignation or reaffirmation of the designation of what has always been historically the case, and which everybody knows, that Israel is the capital. I'm sorry, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and he's moved the U.S. embassy there, etc. And of course, the uprising in the Palestinian debate, or other Middle Eastern countries now threatening the destruction of Israel, etc. What's your take on that whole episode?
Well, it was the capital of Israel since King David took the city about 3,000 years ago, and it stopped being the capital of Israel when the country was destroyed for rebellion. One of the only countries that rebelled against and wouldn't stop rebelling against the Romans. And for 2,000 years, it was a capital of first the Roman. I think they were in Tiberias, and we had the Crusaders and the Ottomans and
Mm-hmm.
the English and
Yeah,
in
don't forget the Muslims.
yeah, well, the Ottoman Turks and
Yeah.
there were Arabs who owned it. It's passed back and forth, but it was historically the capital of the nation of Israel. And in 48, it wasn't. But after 67 war, when Israel was attacked, they took it and held it. And they have done something that none of the other groups were willing to do. Not the Romans, not the Arabs, Muslims, not the Ottoman Muslims, not the Turks, not nobody was willing to do what the Jews have done in Israel, what the Israelis have done, which is they permit full rights of worship to Christians, to Jews, to
And
Muslims,
Muslims, yeah.
to Baha'i, to I
Mhm.
mean, if the Mohammedans, I mean the say the Buddhists, I don't think they have a claim in Jerusalem. But if for some reason they decided that we want to have a little church or whatever they have in Jerusalem, their rights would be protected. You know, if you're a
Mhm.
Muslim in Jerusalem and you want to go to the Al Aqsa Mosque, you know who's protecting you from violence and car bombs from some other schism of Islam because they kill each other just like they kill us. It's a
Oh yes.
violent culture. It's the Israeli army and police, and they guarantee
Mhm.
the right, and they're the ones protecting the Holy Sepulchre. They're not Christians, but they're willing to allow Christians free access, free worship. They don't tell them what to do, when to do, how to do it. They just make sure that they're safe in doing it, which I have a great deal of respect for. Trump did not come up with this policy. Since 1995, it's been a law, and the president has been permitted to give a waiver every 6 months. And Trump simply didn't do what all the presidents since 1995 have done. He had some guts and actually didn't give a waiver. He said, no, we're going to recognize the fact Jerusalem is the capital. And as
Mm.
for all these different European and Muslim countries who, you know, are just super liberal or super socialist or super theocratic or whatever they are, you know, it's funny. They were violent before this, and if this hadn't happened, they wouldn't have stopped being violent. It's just an excuse to beat up a country that actually allows Muslims, Jews, Christians, Druze, whoever they are, to serve in their military, to be citizens, to own property, to observe their own religious rights. There are even members in the Knesset, that's the Israeli parliament, who are not Jews, and they're Muslims, they're Arabs, they're whatever they are. And they got elected and they have a chance to express their views and to vote. And, I really don't have a problem with that. I mean, I don't really like the government of Israel all that much, but then I don't really like governments all that much. They're necessary evil.
Exactly. Well, very interesting. Very interesting. What's your final take? Just, I know we're running over time right now, but quick, what's your take on President Trump, how he's ending his first year? There was a story about his tweets that in year in review. What's your take on his first year? Has he performed well? How would you grade the president?
A solid B. I want more, but he has managed to absolutely expose the bias of the press in ways that no one can possibly deny. The press, the mainstream media. He's exposed the deep state for being in control, no matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in charge. And this tax bill, which I was prepared to, that's what I thought we were going to talk about, was a brilliant move because just like the Democrats who passed Obamacare and Affordable Care Act and said, well, good luck to you trying to unpass this. You'll never be able to do that. Well, good luck trying to unpass tax cuts. And now the Democrats are complaining that the tax cuts aren't permanent, that they expire in 2027 in 8 years. Well, it's funny, but the Congressional Budget Office scores these bills and says it's going to cost us $1 trillion in 8 years, which is bad. I agree. On the other hand, it doesn't count the extra money that always comes in when you lower taxes because more people make more money and they do more things and more taxes are paid. And Obama, his administration in 8 years racked up $8 trillion in debt. So,
right.
Is it good that we're going to be a trillion more in debt? Possibly. No. Is it better than being another $8 trillion in debt? I'd say so.
And there's your final word with Dan Gray. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us. Brilliant words. And of course, let everybody know once again how people can support the work you're doing and or contact you.
Well, as far as support, I'm semi-retired and I'm looking for work. So if you got money and you want somebody like me, then contact me. You can find me on Facebook. I have my picture. There I am with a black shirt holding a sword, and it's a real sword, and I do know how to use it. Just a fencing foil. It's one of my little things that I like to use. And I'm on Twitter. I'm on Gab. Both of those are Dan_Gray_. I'm using Gab more and more. Twitter is just really bothering me, and Facebook is just a waste of time most of the time. I mean, there's some great people on there.
And they admitted, the creators of Facebook admitted, it's meant to get you hooked to the dopamine feedback loop.
It is. I actually made up a meme. If you find me on Facebook, if you just put in Dan Gray and you go on, I'm usually near the top of whoever you're looking for. You see my picture. I look like me. I don't use fake things. I just made up a meme. It was an experiment. So I'm very curious. It's got good response so far. Using a picture by Robert Blake, the great religious artist of the England 1700s. And it's sort of a little rap poem about why Facebook makes me antisocial. So I'd love some feedback on that.
Be sure to check that out, folks. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us this morning, and also all of you joining us from out there in internet, YouTube land. We thank you so much. Have a great day. Have a blessed day. We'll see you tomorrow, 5 a.m. sharp on the King's Report. God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.